The eviction notice was taped to her door, curling at the edges. Calvin Hargrove stood in the courtyard, arms folded, watching the crowd form. Not protesters, just people stopping, staring, filming. Ariel Monroe stood inches from the wall, paint on her fingers, adding one final stroke to the mural he'd ordered painted over. She wasn't rushing, wasn't arguing. "You saw the notice," Calvin said. Ariel nodded, eyes on the wall. "Yes. Then why are you still painting?" "I'm finishing." That simple answer hit harder than defiance ever could. Cars slowed. Phones rose higher. Someone whispered her name. "This building isn't yours." Calvin raised his voice. "That wall comes down with you." "I know who owns it," Ariel said calmly. "You approve the mural." "Temporary," he snapped. "I know." She kept painting. Calvin felt control slipping. The dangerous silence when authority speaks and nothing changes. "Enjoy it while you can," he said. "You're out." Ariel didn't reply. She just painted, because Calvin thought ownership was power. He had no idea evicting her would make that wall. And her art, immortal. Before we go any further, kindly comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure you like the video and subscribe to Silent Struggle Studios. Calvin Hargrove hated crowds when they didn't behave like crowds. He had expected shouting by now. Accusations. Maybe tears. At the very least, noise. Noise meant emotion, and emotion meant leverage. That was how these situations usually went. Someone made a scene, someone lost composure, and he stepped in as the calm authority who owned the paperwork, the keys, the timeline. But the courtyard stayed quiet. Too quiet. The building itself seemed to watch. 3 stories of aging brick, narrow balconies stacked like teeth, the mural stretching across the east-facing wall as if it had grown there rather than been permitted. Sunlight caught the fresh paint, making the colors feel alive. Too alive for something that was supposed to be erased by evening. Calvin shifted his weight and checked his watch. 10 minutes had passed since he'd arrived with the eviction notice already taped up, his name printed clean and official at the bottom. 10 minutes since Ariel Monroe should have stopped painting. She hadn't. She stood close to the wall, brush moving slowly, deliberately. Each stroke was controlled. Not rushed. Not hesitant. The kind of pace that said she had already decided how this moment would unfold. Calvin cleared his throat. "You understand the deadline was yesterday." Ariel didn't turn. "I understand." That was it. No apology. No explanation. He felt a flicker of irritation. "Then you understand I'm within my rights to have this wall cleared immediately." Her brush paused for half a second, then continued. "You are." The answer unsettled him more than defiance would have. She wasn't denying his authority. She was refusing to react to it. Behind him, someone shifted their feet. Calvin didn't look, but he knew the crowd had grown. The courtyard echoed differently now, subtle reverberations of presence. Phones made faint tapping sounds as people adjusted focus. A delivery truck slowed at the curb longer than necessary. Calvin raised his voice, just enough. "You're still on my property." Ariel finally turned her head slightly, enough for him to see her profile. Paint streaked her knuckles. Her expression wasn't hard. It wasn't soft either. It was settled. "You've said that already," she replied. He stepped closer, invading what he assumed was her space. "This mural was approved under a temporary agreement. You exceeded the scope." She angled her body just enough to face him without stepping away from the wall. "You approved the revisions. Twice." Calvin felt heat rise in his chest. "I approved a concept. Not this." "This is the concept," she said. "You just didn't expect people to care." A murmur rippled through the courtyard. Soft but unmistakable. Calvin's jaw tightened. He glanced over his shoulder now, finally acknowledging the onlookers. 10, maybe 15 people. Neighbors. Strangers. A woman with a stroller. 2 college-age kids leaning against the gate. A man across the street pretending to check his phone while recording through the reflection of a car window. This wasn't a protest. That was the problem. Protests were easy to dismiss. This was curiosity turning into attention. He turned back to Ariel. "This conversation doesn't concern them." She dipped her brush into the paint tray again. "You're the one speaking louder." That stung. Calvin straightened his jacket, reasserting posture. Let me be clear. You've been given notice. You're no longer authorized to be here. Continuing to paint won't change that. She studied the wall for a moment, as if considering something only she could see. Then she said, I'm not trying to change your decision. Good, he snapped. Then we're done. But she didn't move. She added another line of color, thin and precise, connecting two shapes that suddenly made sense together. A woman in the mural, abstract, strong lines, eyes lifted, now looked complete in a way she hadn't seconds before. A phone camera zoomed in. Someone inhaled sharply. Calvin noticed. Stop, he said sharper now. Ariel didn't acknowledge the command. She cleaned the brush carefully, wiped her fingers on a rag, then switched to a smaller one. The kind used for details people only noticed when they were close. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Calvin said. No, she replied. I'm making it honest. He laughed once, short and incredulous. Honest doesn't matter. Ownership does. That got her attention. She turned fully now, facing him for the first time. Her eyes were calm, but there was weight behind them, the kind that came from having already lost something and survived it. You think this is about the building, she said. It is, Calvin replied immediately. It always is. She looked past him, toward the people watching. Not to rally them, just to acknowledge their existence. Then back to him. You own the bricks, she said. Not the moment. The crowd reacted before he could. Not loudly, just a subtle shift. Posture straightening, phones lifting higher, someone whispering, that's her. Calvin felt the control slipping and didn't like how quietly it was happening. You're romanticizing this, he said. That won't help you when maintenance shows up. Ariel nodded once. I know when I have to leave. Then leave, he said. In a minute. That phrase again. Calm, measured, unmoved. Calvin's voice hardened. You don't get to dictate terms anymore. She met his stare without blinking. I'm not dictating. I'm finishing what you paid me to start. I didn't pay you for this, he shot back. You paid for the wall, she said. This is the wall. Another murmur. Louder this time. Calvin felt something unfamiliar creeping in beneath his irritation. Uncertainty. Not about his authority, he knew what the paperwork said, but about the optics. About how this looked. About how still she was. How little she seemed to care about the leverage he'd always relied on. He lowered his voice. You're turning this into something it doesn't need to be. Ariel glanced at the eviction, noticed fluttering slightly on the door behind him. You already did that. He followed her gaze, then snapped back. Don't blame me for your situation. I don't, she said simply. That answer disarmed him more than accusation would have. She turned back to the wall, lifting the brush again. The crowd leaned in collectively. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint scrape of bristles against brick. Calvin felt exposed, like the script had flipped and he was the one being observed, evaluated. Every word he said now felt heavier, recorded not just by phones but by memory. This doesn't change the outcome, he said, though it sounded less convincing now. Ariel added the final highlight, stepped back, and tilted her head. She wasn't smiling. I know, she said. That was when Calvin realized the control he thought he had. The notice, the deadline, the authority was no longer the center of the moment. The mural was. And so was she. The crowd wasn't watching a landlord enforce a rule anymore. They were watching a woman finish something she believed mattered, under pressure, without spectacle, without pleading, without asking permission again. Calvin checked his watch once more. The time hadn't changed, but the power had. The eviction notice stayed taped to Ariel Monroe's door long after the sun climbed high enough to bleach the courtyard concrete. No sheriff yet. No movers. Just the paper, thin, official, final, flapping slightly every time a breeze passed through the narrow space between buildings. Calvin Hargrove hadn't expected that. He'd expected noise, begging, anger, a scene he could manage. Instead, he got silence and paint. Ariel was already at the wall again when he returned mid-morning. Same clothes, same calm posture, same slow, deliberate brushstrokes stretching color across brick that had been gray for decades before she ever touched it. The mural had grown overnight. Faces now emerged clearly from the shapes, layered, proud, unmistakably human. Not famous people, not slogans, just presence. People who looked like they belonged exactly where they stood. And people were stopping again. Not gathering in protest. Not chanting. Just watching. Calvin adjusted his jacket and walked closer, the sound of his shoes echoing too loudly in the courtyard. You were told to vacate by noon. Ariel didn't turn. It's 10:30. That doesn't change anything. It changes the clock, she said evenly. Calvin felt it. That same irritation from the night before. Not because she was defiant, but because she wasn't performing fear. He raised his voice just enough for the small cluster of onlookers to hear. You don't have permission to be here. Ariel rinsed her brush in a small bucket. I still have a lease until noon. That lease was terminated. Effective today, she replied. At noon. A pause. Calvin hated pauses. They invited attention. A woman across the courtyard lifted her phone higher. A delivery driver slowed his cart. A man leaned out of the second-floor window, resting his elbows on the sill like he'd settled in for something unscheduled but interesting. Calvin tried a different angle. You're damaging private property. Ariel finally turned, just her head. Paint marked her fingers. You approved the mural. In writing. That approval was conditional. I met the conditions. It was temporary. I know. Her calm landed heavier than an argument ever could. Calvin stepped closer to the wall, pointing. This comes down. Ariel followed his finger with her eyes. After I leave. You don't get to decide that. She dipped her brush again. I'm not deciding. I'm finishing. The crowd shifted. Someone murmured her name again, not loudly, but enough. Calvin felt the narrative slipping. He pulled out his phone. I can call property management. I can have security escort you out. You can, Ariel said. Afternoon. His jaw tightened. This wasn't how authority was supposed to work. Authority spoke, and the world adjusted. Here, the world was watching. He paced a few steps, then turned sharply. You're exploiting this. Ariel frowned slightly. Exploiting what? The attention. The sympathy. She considered that. I didn't invite anyone. A man near the gate spoke up, hesitant but audible. She's been painting that wall for months. Calvin snapped his head toward him. This doesn't concern you. The man raised his hand slightly. Just saying. Calvin turned back to Ariel. You're creating a disturbance. She gestured gently around them. No one's shouting. That was the problem. Calvin lowered his voice, sharp now. If you don't stop, I'll document this as refusal to vacate. You can document whatever you want, she replied. Just document the time. She pointed subtly at his watch. The crowd noticed. Phones tilted downward, then back up, capturing his glance at his wrist. 10:41 a.m. He hated that she was right. Hated that she knew it. Hated that everyone else could see him knowing it. Calvin straightened. Fine. Paint. He stepped back, folding his arms again, reclaiming his spot in the courtyard like a supervisor overseeing disobedience. But the posture didn't carry weight anymore, because Ariel didn't rush. She painted slowly, carefully, adding detail where none had existed the day before. A child's face emerging from shadow. A hand reaching upward, not grasping, just open. People murmured. Someone whispered, "That's beautiful." Calvin heard it. That word didn't belong to him. Didn't belong to buildings or leases or ownership. And yet, it was being said about something on his wall. He tried once more. When this is over, none of this will matter. Ariel didn't stop painting. It already does. The sentence hung there. Not dramatic, not loud, but irreversible. Calvin felt it then, the shift. Not defeat. Something worse. Irrelevance. He was still the landlord. Still had the paperwork. Still had the power to remove her. But control? Control was slipping. Not through rebellion, but through patience. Through witnesses. Through time ticking forward while nothing he said changed her behavior. 11:02 a.m. The courtyard was fuller now. Not packed. Just attentive. Calvin stood there, arms crossed, watching his authority grind itself thinner with every brushstroke. And Ariel kept painting, not because she was allowed to, but because no one could stop her without showing exactly who they were. By late morning, the heat had settled into the courtyard like a hell breath. 11:47 a.m. The eviction notice still clung to Ariel Monroe's door. Edges curled tighter now, the adhesive weakening under the sun. Calvin Hargrove noticed it only because someone else did first. A woman near the gate pointed. Isn't she technically still allowed to be here? Calvin didn't answer. He checked his watch again. 13 minutes. He had imagined this part differently. He'd pictured final words at the decisive moment. Maybe even applause when she finally stepped away from the wall, brush lowered, shoulders slumped. A clean ending. His authority reasserted. The building returned to order. Instead, he got waiting. Ariel stood close to the mural, adding detail so fine it could only be appreciated by those who lingered. She wasn't painting for distance anymore. She was painting for presence. Calvin cleared his throat. You're almost out of time. She nodded once. I know. That was it. No argument. No rush. The crowd leaned into that answer more than they ever would have leaned into defiance. 11:55 a.m. A man in a city maintenance vest stepped into the courtyard, clipboard under his arm. Calvin recognized him immediately and felt a flicker of relief. Finally, procedure. Morning, the man said, neutral. Got a call about a potential tenant dispute. Calvin stepped forward quickly. Yes, she's being evicted today. The man glanced at Ariel, then at the mural. His eyes lingered longer than professionalism required. Today? Yes. He checked the clipboard. Time. Calvin hesitated. Noon. The man nodded slowly. All right, then I'll wait. That word again. Wait. Ariel rinsed her brush one final time. She stepped back from the wall, tilting her head slightly, assessing the piece as a whole. The mural was complete now. Not loud, not political in the obvious ways, but unmistakably alive. The faces seemed to look out into the courtyard, as if aware of the moment. 11:59 a.m. Calvin felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't victory. It felt like concession. Ariel reached in her bag and pulled out a clean cloth, wiping her hands carefully. She packed her brushes one by one, slow, deliberate. The crowd quieted, sensing the end. At exactly noon, she stepped away from the wall. Calvin straightened. This was it. All right, he said, voice firm. That's enough. Ariel turned to him fully for the first time. My things are inside. I'll collect them. Calvin waved a hand. Take what you need and go. She nodded. No drama. No speech. People shifted, disappointed in a way they didn't quite understand. They'd been braced for conflict. Instead, they got closure. Or so it seemed. Ariel disappeared into the building. The courtyard exhaled. Calvin looked around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were still on him. He forced a thin smile. All right, folks. It's over. Some lingered anyway. Phone stayed up longer than necessary. A few people stepped closer to the mural now that Ariel wasn't blocking it. It's really something, someone said quietly. Calvin ignored them. He turned to the maintenance worker. I'll have this painted over immediately. The man glanced at the clipboard again. I'll note the resolution. Resolution. That word tasted wrong. Ariel returned 10 minutes later, carrying a single backpack. Nothing else. She paused at the edge of the courtyard, taking one last look at the mural. Calvin waited for tears. For anger. For something. She just breathed. Then she did something unexpected. She took out her phone. Not to film Calvin, but to take a photo of the wall. Just one. She slipped the phone away, adjusted the strap of her bag, and walked past him toward the gate. Calvin felt compelled to speak. You could have avoided this. She stopped, but didn't turn. No, she said softly. I couldn't. Then she left. No shouting. No protest. No final words. The courtyard began to empty. The maintenance workers scribbled something and left as well. Calvin was alone now with the wall. He stared at the mural, trying to see it as property again, as something temporary. But it didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt finished. By early afternoon, a city truck arrived with paint buckets. Gray, neutral, erasing colors. Calvin supervised from the shade, arms crossed, watching the first roller swipe across the brick. The crowd was gone. The cameras were gone. This was the ending. Or so he told himself. Because later that evening, long after the wall was half covered and the courtyard quiet again, Calvin's phone buzzed. A message from a colleague. Hey, Weird question. Did you evict the artist who painted that mural? Calvin frowned. Type back. Yes. Why? The reply came slower than he expected. Because her work is everywhere right now. Calvin stared at the screen. False resolution has a sound. It's quiet. It feels finished. And it lies. Calvin Hargrove woke before the alarm again, his apartment quieter than usual. The city outside was stirring, traffic beginning its morning crawl, sirens faint in the distance. But inside, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. He rubbed his temples, already anticipating the routine he had rehearsed for weeks. Checking emails, reviewing security footage, confirming schedules. But something in the pit of his chest tightened. It wasn't guilt. Calvin didn't feel guilty. It was awareness. The mural. Ariel Monroe's mural. The colors, the figures, the life she had poured onto the wall. Hours before the eviction crew arrived, refused to leave his mind. He could almost see her hands moving across the brick, see the layering of shadow and highlight, the way a single stroke could capture emotion more effectively than any meeting or memo he had ever signed. He stood, dressed carefully, the suit stiff, perfectly tailored, but somehow it felt like armor that didn't fit. He poured coffee mechanically, black, no sugar, no cream. The steam rose, twisting in the air, but didn't warm him. His eyes kept flicking to the half-closed blinds, the gray morning light slicing thin lines across the office floor. Then the phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. Another email. Same. Unfamiliar sender. His chest tightened slightly. He deleted it, then stared at the empty inbox, wondering why the world was suddenly reaching him when he had tried to remove it. By the time he left for the building, the courtyard had changed in ways he hadn't expected. People were there, not a crowd, but a trickle of observers standing in small, deliberate groups, watching the building as if it were a living exhibit. Phones rose instinctively, fingers hovering above record buttons. Calvin felt a pang of something unfamiliar, irritation laced with uncertainty. He stepped carefully onto the cracked pavement. You can't loiter here, he said, voice sharp, authoritative, meant to reclaim control. The woman holding a camera didn't move. She didn't argue. She tilted her phone slightly, adjusting the angle. I'm not loitering, she said calmly. I'm documenting. Documenting what? Calvin demanded, instinctively trying to reassert his authority. Her hand swept toward the wall, precise, deliberate, almost ceremonious. This. Calvin's throat tightened. This wall isn't yours anymore. It belongs to, he faltered, realizing for the first time how hollow that statement sounded. I know who owns it, she said evenly, but it doesn't belong to anyone who erases memory. He blinked. She didn't even flinch under his gaze. She didn't perform the fear he expected. His words hit only themselves, bouncing back at him like a reflection in a cold glass window. Inside his office, he checked the security feeds. The paint crew was methodical, working as ordered, covering her mural stroke by stroke. Calvin had imagined that watching the color disappear would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like trying to erase a memory already seared into the minds of everyone who had seen it. Another email appeared. This one was more formal, from a city arts nonprofit. We're reviewing a submission connected to your property. Your input is requested. Calvin scoffed. Submission? The mural was temporary, fleeting, irrelevant. He typed a terse not interested, paused, deleted it. Typed no comment, deleted it. Finally, he let the email sit, unresolved, the cursor blinking in judgment. Minutes later, his assistant knocked. Hesitant, unsure. There's a reporter online too, she said. Calvin froze. A reporter? Yes. Regional culture desk. She said it's about the mural. Calvin felt a wave of unease he didn't want to admit. He had expected silence. He had expected compliance from the world. He hadn't expected attention, reverence, even, directed at someone he had dismissed. Tell her I have no comment, he said finally, voice measured but brittle. He returned to the window. Across the street, a few remaining observers angled cameras at the building. They weren't aggressive. They weren't protesting. They were documenting, witnessing, remembering. Every subtle gesture, every quiet act of observation, chipped at Calvin's imagined authority. The paint crew continued. Each roll of gray swallowed her mural, yet with every sweep, the permanence of her impact seemed to grow in the spaces between. Photographs were already circulating online, shared quietly at first, then multiplying as if the city itself were eager to preserve her work. A call came from an unfamiliar number, polite, measured. "Sir, this is the City Arts Council. We're reviewing a submission connected to your property." Calvin's first instinct was irritation. Submission? For what? "The mural," the voice said evenly. "It has been nominated for preservation review. We request a brief statement." He laughed once, short, dismissive. "It was temporary. Yes, we understand. But the documentation has been extensive. The timeline, the photographs, witness accounts, they all indicate significant cultural impact." Calvin exhaled, sharply. "It's my property." "Yes," they said, "and we're aware." The call ended. Calvin stared at the phone long after the line went dead. By mid-afternoon, the wall was officially blank. Gray. Lifeless. The mural gone. Erased physically, yet more present than ever in collective memory. Across the street, people still paused. Phones hovered. They didn't need color to recall its vibrancy. The memory sufficed. His inbox pinged again. This time, a forwarded email from a developer friend. "Did you evict Ariel Monroe?" Calvin exhaled through his nose. "Yes." "Why?" "Because her mural is trending. Nationally." Calvin closed the laptop slowly, the weight of the statement sinking. Trending. He had assumed irrelevance. Instead, it was everywhere, online, in conversation, threaded through city blogs and national social media. Articles documented the timeline, the precision, the moments before the eviction crew arrived. Footage compiled into clips, capturing her calm, her focus, her persistence. He scrolled through them, stomach tightening. People weren't angry at him yet. They weren't shouting. They weren't organizing boycotts. They were remembering her. He realized, viscerally, that his control, his ownership, his authority was meaningless in the face of art. Even erased, even painted over, even removed from his property, her work had outlived him. The day waned. Calvin returned to the courtyard at dusk, the building quiet. The wall was blank, the space gray and flat. But the energy lingered. A few latecomers lingered across the street. Phones lifted, fingers poised. They didn't need color to honor it. They only needed the memory. Calvin understood, finally, though far too late, that some things weren't meant to be owned. Some creations refused to belong. The mural was gone. Her legacy was not. And in the quiet, Calvin felt the first true twinge of consequence. Subtle, silent, irreversible. The morning after the mural was painted over, Calvin Hargrove arrived at the office with a sense of routine he no longer felt in his bones. The elevator hummed. The polished floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. Yet something in the air had shifted. He noticed it almost immediately. The quiet urgency in his assistant's steps, the way she avoided looking directly at him. "Sir," she said cautiously, handing him a stack of papers. "These came in overnight, from the city and from a few other sources." Calvin flipped through them, brow furrowing. Reports, emails, and forwarded messages, innocuous at first glance. Nothing urgent, nothing he hadn't expected, yet there was a pattern he couldn't immediately place. Every report referenced Ariel Monroe's mural. Every photograph, every eyewitness account meticulously documented her work, her presence, her calm defiance in the courtyard. He set the papers down and rubbed his forehead. "They're overreacting," he muttered under his breath. "They're interested," his assistant said, voice hesitant. "The mural is now part of the city's cultural review. They're considering official recognition. They've even tagged it in historical archives online." Calvin's chest tightened. He leaned against the desk, silent for a long moment. Recognition, cultural review, historical archives. All procedural, all measured, all invisible, but impossible to ignore. He picked up the first photograph. Ariel's hands were still smeared with paint, the streaks of color visible even in the grainy image. The posture, the calm, the deliberate strokes, Every detail had been captured. Every witness had recorded it. He scrolled further down the feed of forwarded emails and social media clips. Her work had already gone beyond local awareness. City blogs, regional newspapers, and now national outlets had begun sharing the story. The timing was slow, indirect. No one had called him, yet to confront him directly. There was no headline screaming at his failure. There was only acknowledgement, recognition, proof of her impact growing in the shadows, procedural, almost bureaucratic, but undeniable. By midday, his assistant knocked again, more urgent this time. "Sir, the Arts Council is requesting a statement." And she hesitated. "There's a journalist from a national outlet at the front desk. She wants to speak about the mural." Calvin's hand twitched. "I've said enough," he said sharply. She insisted. The assistant replied softly. "They're calling it a cultural moment. They want a response." He stood, feeling the familiar grind of authority eroding beneath him. He had expected compliance, silence, resignation. Instead, her art had slipped past every barrier he thought he controlled. He walked to the window, the city unfolding below. Across the street, the courtyard was quiet. The wall, now gray and featureless, betrayed nothing of the impact it had generated. Yet every digital recording, every forwarded email, every mention in the media had begun forming an undeniable truth. Her defiance, her calmness, her persistence had created momentum he couldn't erase. He picked up his phone again. The caller ID read unknown. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the green icon. Finally, he answered. "Mr. Hargrove," a calm voice said. "This is the City Arts Council. We've completed the preliminary review of the submission connected to your property." Calvin felt a tightening in his chest. "Yes. What does that entail?" "There's no immediate action required from you," the voice said. "But the documentation, photographs, and witness statements indicate that the mural has significant cultural value. We recommend preservation measures, recognition, and further study." Calvin exhaled sharply. Preservation? Recognition? The mural was temporary. It was meant to be removed. "Yes," the voice said evenly. "We understand. But the public record, the documentation, and the community response suggest that this work has transcended its initial scope. It has already begun influencing public perception, and its cultural relevance is now formally noted." Calvin pinched the bridge of his nose. He had imagined erasure, compliance, silence. Instead, her mural had begun to outlive him, outlive the eviction, and outlive his authority. Later that afternoon, a forwarded message landed in his inbox. From a city historian. Ariel Monroe's mural on building address has been archived as part of the city's public art project. Documentation has been verified and cataloged. This includes video footage from the morning before removal. He stared at the email for several minutes. His eyes drifted to the gray wall, blank and unremarkable, and yet every line of text seemed to amplify her presence. He had expected finality. What he received was slow, quiet recognition, proof that her calm persistence had created an irreversible mark. He tried to regain composure. "It's just bureaucracy," he muttered to himself. "Just procedure." But the calls kept coming. Emails piled up, each one procedural, each one calm, each one slowly unraveling his narrative. No one yelled. No one confronted. They merely documented, acknowledged, and moved the information forward. And in that procedure, the delayed reveal gnawed at him more sharply than any confrontation ever could. By evening, he walked past the courtyard again, the setting sun casting elongated shadows over the gray wall. He felt the weight of cameras, phones, and witness recollections even in their absence. The air seemed to hum quietly with attention he hadn't earned. He realized, with a sudden clarity that made his chest tighten, that control was no longer his. The delayed reveal wasn't dramatic. It didn't crash through his door. It didn't announce itself with violence or confrontation. It came slowly, methodically, invisibly, through email threads, council memos, social posts, and archived footage. Ariel Monroe had already transcended his authority. The world would remember her, not him. And Calvin, standing alone in the twilight, felt the subtle, suffocating weight of being on the outside of a story he thought he controlled. The day began quietly, deceptively so. Calvin Hargrove arrived at the office, but the calm was false. An undercurrent of inevitability hummed in every corner. The lobby receptionist didn't greet him cheerfully. She simply slid a stack of letters across the counter, each stamped with the official seal of some city office he didn't recognize. He hesitated, realizing this wasn't a morning for small talk. Each envelope, precisely labeled, contained notifications that were procedural, unemotional, and methodical. One from the City Arts Council, one from the local Historic Preservation Office, another from a community oversight committee. Each letter carefully referenced Ariel Monroe's mural, the community's interest, and the fact that public records now noted her work. Calvin flipped through them, scanning for weaknesses, loopholes, anything he could use to assert control. But there was nothing. Every document was meticulously prepared. Dates, times, photographs, digital timestamps, official signatures. Nothing subjective, nothing emotional, nothing to argue against. Each piece was a silent hammer, not dramatic, but persistent. He called his assistant over. "What's going on? Why so many notices?" "They're procedural," she said carefully. "Every one of these actions follows proper protocol. Each department is documenting the mural, the approval, and public interest. They're all independent, but the result is the same. It's on record, officially recognized. It's unstoppable." Calvin scowled. "Unstoppable." "Yes," she said softly. "If it were just you, it would be easier. But they've combined timelines, witnesses, and official verifications. Every procedural step creates another layer of accountability. Eventually, they'll converge." He tried to reassure himself. "I can fix this in a meeting. I can control the narrative." By 10:30, a notice came from the building's legal counsel. A formal request. All planned renovations affecting the mural were to be halted until a review was completed. No yelling, no dramatics, just law, procedure, and process. Calvin read and reread it, each sentence further restricting his authority. The first meeting convened at 11 o'clock. Calvin entered, expecting a chance to dominate, to assert himself as decision-maker. Instead, the room had already shifted. On the long conference table lay copies of city correspondence, screenshots of Ariel's work, official timestamps, public witness statements, and press mentions. Each item was silent, unemotional, methodical, and procedural. A board member looked up calmly. "Mr. Hargrove, the documentation is complete. The mural has been recorded, cataloged, and verified. Any removal or modification requires approval from the Arts Council and Historic Preservation Committee." Calvin bristled. "But procedurally," another voice interrupted, calm and firm, "you are bound to comply. Any attempt to act outside this framework risks legal consequences and procedural violations." It wasn't confrontation, it was slow suffocation. Each step was a gentle, inexorable tightening of constraints. Calvin realized that authority wasn't being undermined with shouting or spectacle. It was quietly, methodically stripped through procedure. He tried calling in his assistant mid-meeting, hoping to argue, to push back, but even her words reflected the weight of bureaucracy. "Calvin, every action she took is documented. Every approval, every photograph, every witness is verified. The system now enforces her presence." By late morning, internal communications began piling up. Emails from city offices, building management systems, and local historians flooded in. Each one procedural, unemotional, citing policy, precedent, and official recognition. They weren't threats. They were inevitabilities. Each memo, each phone call, each timestamp reinforced the same truth. The mural existed in a space beyond Calvin's unilateral authority. Lunch passed in silence. Calvin sat alone in his office, staring at the wall that had once been his. Across the street, the mural gleamed under the sun, untouched, permanent. Even casual observers, residents, delivery drivers, tourists, were filming it, documenting it, posting it online. Every video, every photo, every record added to the institutional weight bearing down on him. By mid-afternoon, the pressure extended further. City officials conducted an on-site review, noting everything: the mural's condition, public accessibility, and community reactions. Calvin could only follow protocol, answer questions, and sign forms. There was no opportunity for resistance. He was watched, measured, and recorded at every procedural step. Internal memos circulated within the management company, subtle but unmistakable. References to the mural's public significance, her calm professionalism, and the growing community pressure. Every procedural note was another nail in the coffin of his control. He had authority on paper, but in reality, every action was constrained, monitored, and reversible. By late afternoon, even the press had begun citing official correspondence. Headlines were measured. Historic recognition granted for community mural. Building must comply with city preservation procedures. Artist's work legally documented. Modifications require council approval. No spectacle, no confrontation, no shouting. Just law, procedure, and process moving inexorably forward, suffocating his unilateral power. By evening, Calvin sat in the quiet of his office, papers strewn across his desk like silent evidence of inevitability. The system had taken over. Ariel's calm persistence, her patience, her deliberate focus on finishing the mural had now created a record that could not be erased. Authority alone was powerless against institutional recognition and procedural enforcement. He realized, finally, that he hadn't lost because of defiance or spectacle. He had lost to slow, measured, unavoidable process, meticulous documentation, careful verification, and methodical bureaucracy. Each procedural step was like a weight pressing down, a quiet but relentless force he could not control. The mural existed beyond him. The building was no longer merely his. And every procedural step ensured that her work, and by extension, her legacy, was protected, permanent, and immortal in a way that he could never erase. Calvin Hargrove's office smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and something sour, his own sweat, though he didn't notice until mid-morning. The sunlight slicing through the blinds highlighted the mess of files on his desk. Eviction notices, maintenance schedules, tenant complaints, all meticulously arranged in neat stacks that now felt like weapons pointed at him. He circled the room, briefcase in hand, checking every corner, every surface. He wanted control. He wanted leverage. But the room offered none. He picked up the eviction notice taped to the wall, staring at the stark typeface of her name, Ariel Monroe. He traced the letters with his finger, imagining the power that had once surged through his veins. Ownership, authority, control. Now it felt brittle, fragile, like a sugar sculpture under heat. The mural she had painted was alive, viral, celebrated. It wasn't just paint on brick. It was a monument to calm defiance, procedural mastery, and public accountability. And he had no recourse. His assistant, Mara, appeared in the doorway. Calvin, the Arts Council just posted a feature online. Ariel's mural is trending regionally. People are sharing footage. The petition to protect it is gaining signatures. You. Calvin cut her off with a sharp wave. Not now. His voice shook slightly, a detail he caught immediately, a tremor he had never allowed himself. Mara hesitated, blinking, unsure whether to retreat or persist. Every interaction, every comment, every share, it's piling up. You can't ignore it. Even legal counsel. Enough, Calvin snapped. The words came out harsher than intended, raw, jagged. He paced again, desk chair scraping the floor. He thought of Ariel standing there, fingers smeared with paint, calm as the crowd murmured behind her. The audacity of her quiet defiance burned in his chest. He had imagined confrontation, shouting, legal threats. Every scenario he had rehearsed dissolved the moment he saw her calm, deliberate hands at work, unconcerned with his authority. He sank into his chair, fingers pressed against his temples. Each phone pinged from the city officials, the oversight committee, his legal department, even local news alerts, felt like a hammer striking the foundations of his ego. One message: all permits and approvals favor the artist. Any attempt to remove or alter the mural may result in legal action and fines. Another: the community has petitioned for the mural's preservation. Their support is strong. Consider procedural constraints before acting. The procedural tide had become a tsunami. Each notification, each recorded instance of Ariel's calm persistence, chipped away at his authority. Every word he had used to assert dominance now echoed back at him as evidence of his impotence. He wanted to scream, to assert his ownership, to demand compliance. But all those avenues were blocked by procedure, documentation, and public awareness. By late morning, Calvin found himself obsessively scrolling through social media coverage. Every view count, every like, every comment was a subtle humiliation. The mural saved the building. Ariel Monroe just owns this space. Landlord powerless. Each post, each share, compounded his sense of helplessness. The building that had once been his symbol of control had become a monument to his failure. He tried to distract himself with other tasks, but everything reminded him of the mural. Maintenance reports, tenant requests, scheduling conflicts. Each email, each memo subtly referenced it. Wall modification requests must comply with preservation review. Community stakeholders consulted. Temporary approval lapses are irrelevant due to procedural protections. Every bureaucratic rule and careful procedure reinforced Ariel's dominance and his impotence. By early afternoon, the collapse extended beyond work. Staff interactions became theater for his failing authority. Office meetings were punctuated with subtle reminders of his inability to act. Department heads, careful and professional, alluded to procedural approvals and community sentiment. Calvin, any action against the mural would violate preservation policy. We should consult the City Council first. The Arts Council's designation is final unless challenged through proper channels. Each comment, each pause, each measured sentence felt like another nail in the coffin of his ego. He retreated repeatedly to his office, alone, obsessing over every interaction with Ariel. Her calmness, her focus, her deliberate painting haunted him. He replayed her every word. "I'm finishing." Every statement was precise, unyielding, simple, but infinitely more powerful than any shout he could muster. Each recollection gnawed at him, a slow erosion of dominance. Calvin's body began to mirror his mental state. Shoulders tight, hands trembling slightly, pulse rising. Meals were forgotten, hydration neglected. The procedural reality had become an all-consuming weight. The mural had become more than a wall. It was a psychological force, a symbol of inevitability he could neither control nor confront. Even minor, everyday events began to feel like attacks. The building's tenants whispered as he passed. Neighbors lingered near the mural, cameras in hand, filming, documenting. Emails that had once seemed trivial were now weapons in the slow dismantling of his authority. He read and reread procedural documents, memos, and emails, seeking loopholes that weren't there. Every document, every approval, reinforced Ariel's position and his powerlessness. By evening, insomnia took hold. Calvin lay awake in his bedroom, ceiling unadorned, mind replaying every failure. He envisioned confrontations that could never happen, threats that would fall flat, authority that had evaporated. Ariel's calm defiance played on loop in his mind, a mantra of procedural inevitability. "I'm finishing." He rose in the dead of night, wandering the courtyard alone. The mural glowed under the soft street lamplight, every stroke sharp, deliberate, eternal. It was more than paint. It was process, preparation, legality, and public accountability converging into a monument he could neither erase nor damage. He touched the railing, eyes fixed on the wall, feeling the futility in his grip. The collapse now extended to every aspect of his life. Meetings felt impossible. Communication with staff, tense. Phone calls, even casual, were met with micro-expressions of judgment, hesitation, subtle resistance. The world he thought he controlled had quietly, invisibly, shifted. Authority was no longer a currency. It was a memory of power lost. By 3 a.m., he found himself back at his desk, tracing every interaction from the eviction notice to the latest Arts Council announcement. He scribbled notes obsessively, hoping to map out a path to regain control. Each plan he conceived was immediately invalidated by procedural safeguards, public support, and Ariel's calm resolve. He realized the truth. This was not chaos. This was deliberate, methodical, procedural, unstoppable. Every micro-step she had taken, every deliberate calm stroke of the brush, had created a fortress around her authority and her art. He imagined confronting her again, shouting, demanding compliance, threatening legal action. Every scenario dissolved before his mind's eye. Procedure would prevail, public attention would follow, and every aggressive step would be documented, amplified, and used against him. The slow, grinding weight of inevitability was crushing. By dawn, Calvin had ceased pacing. He sat in the courtyard, watching the mural in the dim light, tracing its contours with his gaze. The building, once his fortress, had become a cage. Every corner, every shadow, every subtle angle reminded him of his impotence. Authority, he realized, was an illusion sustained by the compliance of others, and compliance had abandoned him. Even small reminders, tenants chatting near the wall, neighbors filming, phone notifications, felt like blows to the ego. The collapse wasn't violent. There were no dramatic confrontations. There were no riots. It was slow, methodical, invisible to all but him, yet absolute. His authority evaporated under the weight of public procedure, quiet resistance, and calm persistence. By the time the city was fully awake, Calvin Hargrove had been reduced to a shell of confidence. Emails, memos, phone calls, social media, and public visibility had slowly eroded his sense of power. Ariel Monroe, calm, precise, untouchable, stood as proof that ownership, authority, and intimidation could be outmaneuvered by patience, public accountability, and procedure. Calvin slumped against the railing one last time before retreating indoors. The mural shimmered in the early light, and for the first time, he understood fully. The story wasn't over, and he had already lost. His collapse was complete, psychological, procedural, irreversible. The weight of inevitability, the crushing realization that his control was an illusion, and the slow, relentless procedural accountability of the system had left him powerless. Even as the morning hum began, as tenants emerged, as street traffic picked up, Calvin's mind remained trapped in the aftermath, staring at the mural that would outlast him, outshine him, and forever serve as a monument to calm, methodical resistance. The city council meeting room was silent, save for the occasional rustle of papers and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Calvin Hargrove sat near the back, posture stiff, hands clenched on the polished oak table. Around him, a panel of city officials, legal advisors, and members of the Arts Council prepared for the discussion of the mural's preservation and the events surrounding Ariel Monroe's eviction. Each document in front of them had been meticulously compiled. Video evidence, signed statements, procedural reviews, and community petitions. Every piece was a nail in the coffin of Calvin's authority. He tried to arrange his notes, straighten his tie, check his watch, anything to regain the illusion of control, but every glance around the room reminded him of the stakes. On the projector screen, images of Ariel's mural appeared, sharp, vibrant, and undeniable. The crowd in the room, journalists and residents alike, leaned forward, recording, whispering, nodding in approval. The room's atmosphere was calm, measured, but electric with scrutiny. The first speaker was the Arts Council representative. Their voice was precise, measured, unyielding. Ms. Monroe's work meets all criteria for preservation under city and regional art ordinances. The approval process was followed, permits were verified, and all legal parameters confirmed. Any attempt to remove or alter the mural would constitute a procedural violation. Calvin's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to interrupt, to assert ownership, but he felt the invisible weight of documentation pressing down on him. Every attempt to speak now would be procedural suicide. Next came video testimony, shot by neighborhood residents, documenting the mural's creation. Phones, dashcams, and security footage played in sequence. Ariel at work, calm and composed. Paintbrush moving with methodical precision, crowd reactions, Calvin's initial confrontation. Every shot reinforced what he had already felt but could not articulate. The public, procedural, and moral authority had shifted irrevocably. Calvin shifted in his chair, fingers tapping nervously. Legal advisors whispered into earpieces, confirming the inevitable. The mural was untouchable under current law. Even temporary permissions granted by him were now irrelevant, overridden by city preservation statutes and public recognition. Each whisper in his ear, every nod from a council member, chipped away at what remained of his confidence. A community leader took the floor next. Their statement was calm, unwavering, precise. Calvin Hargrove's actions, while legally documented as landlord procedures, caused significant distress and risked erasure of community art. The process has revealed gaps in oversight and the need for stricter enforcement of procedural review. Calvin's jaw tightened. The words were procedural, not accusatory, but every clause, every carefully chosen phrase highlighted failure. His mind raced through counterarguments, legal loopholes, procedural exceptions, but each one dissolved under the weight of evidence, public attention, and regulatory procedure. Ariel Monroe, seated at the far end of the table, remained silent, hands folded in her lap. She did not speak, did not flinch, and did not need to. Her calmness was a weapon, infinitely more powerful than any shouting or legal threat. Every document, every video, every procedural review reinforced her authority and exposed his missteps. The meeting stretched on for hours. Testimonies were read aloud. Tenant statements, Arts Council evaluations, public petitions, and video compilations. Every individual detailed, in calm, precise language, the events of the past week. Calvin's attempts to assert control, the calm persistence of Ariel, the public witnessing, and the mural's undeniable significance. Each procedural recounting was a subtle blow, unrelenting, slow, impossible to counter without breaking the rules, or his composure. By mid-afternoon, council members began asking Calvin questions directly. He answered cautiously, every word measured, every syllable weighed. His usual confidence had eroded. He felt the tremor of self-doubt creeping into speech. Every answer highlighted procedural gaps, his own miscalculations, and the inevitability of public accountability. Mr. Hargrove, one council member asked, voice neutral but firm, were you aware that your eviction notice conflicted with Ms. Monroe's mural approval permit? Calvin swallowed. I have to believe the notice was within my rights. His voice was tight. Procedurally, I followed the standard eviction process. Another member interrupted gently, sliding a stack of documents across the table. These approvals were signed prior to your notice, confirmed, and publicized. The process you initiated disregarded these documents. Calvin's hands clenched the edge of the table. Each motion, each procedural citation, stripped him of the authority he thought he wielded. Every attempt to assert control now reinforced his exposure. The council paused, conferring quietly among themselves. Calvin could hear the soft shuffling of papers, the click of pens against notepads, the subtle vibrations of phones capturing everything for the official record. Each sound was a reminder that his authority was no longer in his hands. A resident approached the microphone, calm but precise. I live in this building. I watched Ms. Monroe create this mural. I filmed it. I saw Mr. Hargrove attempt to remove it. What she's done, her patience, her adherence to procedure, has preserved a piece of our community. I urge the council to enforce protections. The record must reflect not just ownership, but responsibility. Calvin's face burned. He wanted to interrupt, to argue, to demand respect, but every microsecond of hesitation in his body language, every twitch of a hand, every falter of tone was now on record, amplified by the council, the public, and the law. His authority had been systematically dismantled, step by step, moment by moment, procedural check by procedural check. The day progressed into evening. Reports from city inspectors were read aloud, documenting procedural violations in Calvin's handling of the eviction notice. Legal advisors confirmed that any removal of the mural without full review would constitute fines and potential litigation. Every procedural safeguard, every public record, and every official comment stacked against him like bricks, each one heavier than the last. Calvin realized fully that the collapse he had felt in private was now public. His miscalculations, his assumptions of dominance, his misunderstanding of procedural reality, everything had been documented, reviewed, and exposed. There was no private retreat, no quiet corner of the office, no informal conversation could restore the illusion of control. Every action and inaction was permanently recorded. A final report was projected, a timeline meticulously detailing Ariel Monroe's mural, the eviction notice, community responses, social media circulation, and council communications. Each frame, each email, each timestamp reinforced the truth. The mural was untouchable, the artist calm and methodical, and Calvin's authority dismantled. By the time the council adjourned, Calvin Hargrove walked out into the night, posture stiff, face tight, eyes tired. The city lights reflected off the mural in the courtyard, its colors vivid against the fading sky. He understood, fully, that procedural accountability, public scrutiny, and calm defiance had not only protected a work of art, they had dismantled a man's authority. Outside, neighbors lingered, cameras in hand. The mural gleamed under lamplight, and for the first time, Calvin Hargrove recognized that the building no longer belonged to him in any meaningful sense. Ownership, authority, and intimidation were illusions when confronted by methodical calm, procedural knowledge, and public record. He retreated to his car, sitting behind the wheel in silence. Every phone notification from the day, emails, texts, council summaries, media coverage, pinged in succession. He felt the full weight of professional reckoning, the procedural cage closing in. Even his private retreat, he could not escape. Every record, every camera angle, every procedural citation would follow him indefinitely. The mural stood, bright and immortal. Ariel Monroe remained calm, her focus unwavering. And Calvin Hargrove, once confident in authority, now felt the profound, slow-burning weight of accountability, exposure, and professional collapse. The public and professional reckoning was complete. The lesson was undeniable. Procedure, community, and calm persistence outweighed ego, ownership, and intimidation. The city had moved on, or at least pretended to. Streets hummed with their usual rhythm. The courthouse doors swung open and closed, and council members returned to desks and committees. But in the courtyard where the mural had come to life and survived, something had changed. The building no longer belonged to Calvin Hargrove in anything but name. His ownership was a legal technicality, his authority a memory fading. Ariel Monroe returned that morning, as she always did, carrying brushes and a small kit of paints. She moved slowly, deliberately, over the mural she had defended so patiently. It wasn't perfect. The sunlight hits colors differently now, some fading, some sharpening with shadows. She ran a finger over a corner, tracing lines she had painted weeks ago. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply observed. Neighbors walked by, some nodding, some stopping to take photos or record short clips. A few left comments on social media, short, admiring, reverent, but there were no crowds, no proclamations, no interviews. The work had earned its permanence quietly. Ariel didn't need applause. She had no audience in mind. The mural itself was witness enough. Inside the building, Calvin Hargrove moved differently. Meetings he once dominated now felt mechanical, hollow, procedural. Emails awaited responses he could no longer answer with conviction. Staff, lawyers, and council members treated him with careful politeness, the kind reserved for someone who had been exposed but not humiliated openly. He still had a title, still collected rent, but every action was now under scrutiny, every decision carefully weighed. Even small errors, procedural oversights, minor miscalculations would be noted, documented, and potentially referenced later. Back outside, Ariel cleaned her brushes. She placed them in a small tin, careful not to spill any remaining pigment. Rocco, her loyal companion, lounged beside her, head resting on her knee. The dog's leg had fully healed, but she still checked it often, gently, as if the act of care was inseparable from her art. She looked at the mural one last time that morning and felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not victory, but a steady acknowledgement of completion. For days, people continued to stop by. Some were artists themselves, inspired, asking questions about technique and color. Some were locals who had witnessed the eviction attempt or remembered seeing Calvin confront her. Ariel answered when asked, briefly and clearly. She spoke of process, of inspiration, of patience. She never mentioned Calvin Hargrove unless directly asked, and even then, her words were measured, factual, almost procedural. She had no desire to gloat. The mural became a landmark, not overnight, not with a viral headline, but slowly, organically. It appeared in art walks, in community guides, in the quiet conversations of neighbors pointing out its significance to newcomers. It was celebrated not because of the confrontation, but because of its permanence, its resonance, and the story of calm perseverance behind it. Calvin attempted to regain control. He sent letters, requested meetings, and tried to appeal procedural technicalities. Each time, the response he received was measured, professional, and immutable. Every official email referenced city ordinances, documented approvals, and legal precedent. The system had closed around him not with anger, but with quiet precision. No one shouted. No one dramatized it. His failures were recorded, cataloged, and proceduralized. At home, he reviewed footage of the mural's creation and the confrontation. Every pause, every measured movement by Ariel, every step he had taken in frustration, it was all there. He could see the calm, controlled authority in her actions, the precise timing of each brushstroke, the unwavering attention to detail. And he understood, at last, that ownership meant nothing in the face of patience, legality, and moral authority. Weeks later, Ariel returned to the mural once more, this time to add a subtle enhancement. A small detail, almost invisible unless one looked closely. She moved with quiet precision, Rocco by her side. The neighborhood watched from a distance, a few cars slowing, a few cameras raised. She didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. Every stroke was permanent, a quiet testament that creativity outlives possession, and that calm persistence carries consequences beyond confrontation. Calvin walked past the building that afternoon. He didn't stop. He didn't glare. The mural was intact, vibrant, and unmovable. The artist had remained calm. The system had followed procedure. The public had witnessed. Everything he had tried to assert, the authority, the ownership, the intimidation, had dissolved under quiet observation, procedural correctness, and the steadfastness of one person refusing to be rushed or manipulated. Inside the building, staff whispered cautiously when his name was mentioned. Contracts, permissions, approvals. Everything had shifted subtly enough that he couldn't regain full authority without formal review. Every email, every note, every small procedural misstep would now live in a record that could be referenced, cited, and enforced. He had authority in theory, but power in practice was gone, diffused, procedural, and forever moderated by the calm persistence he had once underestimated. Ariel, meanwhile, did not celebrate. She painted, observed, cleaned, repeated her routines. Her focus remained on creation, on legacy, on the integrity of her work. The mural stood as a silent monument not to confrontation or victory, but to endurance, precision, and the quiet persistence of artistry over ownership. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, The mural glowed under the soft evening light. Calvin Hargrove passed by once more, shoulders slightly hunched, aware that his attempts at control had been dismantled systematically, meticulously, procedurally. Ariel packed her brushes, Rocco following, and walked away. No applause. No headlines. No dramatic moment. Just a quiet exit. The city, the building, and the mural remained. Her legacy persisted, and in the silence, the lesson was clear. Art outlives ownership. Authority is temporary. Calm persistence and adherence to procedure endure. Some stories are uncomfortable. That's why they matter. At Silent Struggle Studios, we tell the truths that are often ignored, quietly, clearly, and without apology. If you like our story and it resonated with you, kindly like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Silent Struggle Studios so you don't miss what comes next. Also comment which city and country you're watching from, because here, all your voices matters. On your screen now, there are two powerful stories I picked specially just for you. Every voice carries weight, and some truths deserve to be heard in full.